So I need to ask you, like, is our mainstream media being controlled by a state?
Well, the irony for me is that we've got, we had Chris Alexander, the former immigration minister, basically defame somebody who I've known for 25, 30 years, David Pugliese, who was a defense writer. And he's been a damn good defense writer for many years. I always agree with everything David Pugliese writes, but he will write about any corruption in the Canadian military, whether it's coming from the conservatives or the liberals or from the back door. He is a defense reporter, and he was accused of being a Russian agent at the Security Committee. Not a single person on that committee has expressed any defense of Pugliese. Nobody expressed any suspicions that this might be disinformation itself. But it amazes me is that the mainstream media wants to talk about Russian disinformation and wants to talk about all of these things, but doesn't want to talk about China. And it doesn't want to talk about the fact that it is being subsidized by the Trudeau government. So how can you trust the mainstream media when it's being subsidized by the Canadian government?
Hmm.
It's one thing to say, oh, this reporter was being paid by the Russian government, so you can't trust him. He's producing work that is in accordance with Russian policy. What about all of those journalists who are bought and paid for by the Trudeau government? Are they not being paid for by a government to print the news that that government wants to hear, to broadcast the news that the Liberal government wants to hear? Is that not a conflict of interest? Is that not disinformation? When you've got all of these journalists working for the Liberal government, essentially, not just at CBC, but all of the mainstream media is receiving subsidies from this government. And it's only the new media and independent media that aren't getting it.
Hmm.
And that to me suggests we have a huge problem with our mainstream media, which I say probably won't be here in 4 years. If you look back 4 years from now, if you look at what was reality in 2020, the mainstream media was still fairly viable. You could still find like the National Post or the Globe and Mail at your corner store. You can't anymore. And if you do, they're like 5 to 6 pages in length. And they're not doing well on the internet either. And none of these gimmicks that Trudeau has sold is subsidy or any of these censorship laws that are geared to help the mainstream media are working because the public is leaving the mainstream media en masse in droves. And they're not getting their news there anymore. So in 4 years, are we going to have a mainstream media? Certainly not in any form that it exists today. It will be completely denuded with resources. And if you look at it today, it's certainly in a much weaker position than it was even 2 years ago.
Hmm. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, David.